just a certain way some of the things that we've read, it wouldn't be too hard to take a detour and somehow confuse the message of Christ with nothing more than a poverty vow. I have, and I will continue to, I have made a big deal about how incompatible competition is with actually adopting the philosophy of Jesus. The notion that engaging in things that in order to succeed, I have to prevent somebody else from succeeding is in fact entirely incompatible with following Jesus. It's incompatible with following Jesus. So how do we eat? We have to get a cardboard sign and some tattered clothes and go stand at the shopping center and hope that people take mercy. Is that the only way that followers of Christ can have dinner? Does it mean that we're not going to live in a house unless somebody's just generous with us by virtue of the fact that they compete? So we take advantage of their prosperity and say, look, I'm holy, and now I'm beholden to this person who's not. That's not rational, is it? If we put on tattered clothes and sit out in the cold and have near frostbite on our ears and fingertips all the time, and say, would you help me out? And people see us once in a while dumpster diving so that we can have something to eat because we didn't succeed in our panhandling that day. Is that really compatible with making the religion of Jesus attractive? That's not attractive, is it? I don't think anybody would be attracted to that whatsoever. Daniel Kahneman, and he's a psychologist, and Angus Deaton, an economist, published in 2010 the results of a study that looked at tens of thousands of people's responses to a questionnaire survey that tried to figure out for our country, currently in 2009, they collected the data, it published in 2010, I understand. How much money does it take, number one, to make you happy? And how much money does it take so that you have so much money that you don't need any more money to get happier? In other words, is there a point at which, when you get more money, you're not going to have any more satisfying a life? You're not going to be more happy, more content, or anything like that if you get more than a certain amount. In fact, when they started the study, they didn't know the answer. I don't think that they were dishonest scholars setting out to prove something. They were just checking to see if there was any correspondence among tens of thousands of folk for how much they earned per year for the household and how happy they actually were, how they felt about life. And it turns out that they found there was an amount in, wow, I'm breaking the chalk habit. Let's see if I can do something about that. Fortunately, I have some chalk. You can pull it out. It's here too, actually. It's not. Is there? Well, we can use that until we run out, and then I'll leave it for live. Okay. They found that there's a point at which, if we have happiness here and dollars per year household, and beyond that, it doesn't matter how far you go, you don't get any happier. Period. And this amount here in 2010 for the national average was $75,000 per household. Now that's a national average. It's not for California. And in California, you have to look at which county, because there's places in California that are a fortune. The city limits of San Francisco, right in the financial district in San Francisco, for instance.
How did they determine that? Was it in the survey?
It was a survey.
Oh, okay.
Yes. And it was one that was conducted according to reasonable scholastic standards. It wasn't like in the back of Ladies' Home Journal. It wasn't that kind of thing. It was conducted by two scientists, according to scientific standards. And yes.
What's the y-axis?
I'm sorry?
What's on y-axis?
The y-axis is happiness, level of happiness. It's possible to tease out literally for weeks the details of the study, but in their interpretation, and in probably what ours would be if we teased it out, that's kind of the cut to the chase. That's the bottom line. I am. Man, where am I today? Somewhere else. And I had a question back here too. That's right. Yeah, so does everybody have the attendance sheet? Oh, you're the next. Outstanding. And everybody's here. Almost.
No, I have one missing.
Okay. Now, inflation right now is low in terms of what I'm used to over my 54 years. I've seen inflation in the United States much higher than it has been since 2009 when this data was collected. But it still exists. And so this would not be true today. We would have to raise this. I'd say we'd have to raise it at least to 80, maybe to 82 or 3. In California, in 2009, just that data, the California average was $94,500. Okay, so that's considerably more. Now that's not per person; that's for the household. Now there's some confounding variables, like how big is a household? Because a household could be a single person. Now that might offset because there's varying happiness. There's entire surveys to determine whether and what kind of person is happy when they're single or they're part of a different household configuration. That depends on who you are. In essence, though, what we're saying is that when you're down here, whatever arguments there are for where we ought to set this, that's not the point. This could be set by the time you graduate. It could be set at 120 where you live, for instance. If you decide to go to live in Thailand or someplace like that, you could very likely, if you had a U.S. income of $30,000, you'd be living well in some villages and some places where you could go to the beach every day and eat gourmet food and live in a really nice house and have somebody else drive you around. But it's all relative to where you live. But it's not really relative to how much money you have. You know, in terms of spending, it is how much you can obtain. When you cannot meet your basic needs, it is difficult to be as happy. And it's difficult to even to manage your mood trajectory when you're not eating well. You don't have the chemicals to run your body adequately. You don't have the energy to run your body. When you're not able to be warm, when you have to scramble to find a place that's not uncomfortable to sleep at night, that's a problem. Also, there's a certain amount of money that is required to be spent in many places, not everywhere, but in a lot of places. The amount you pay is going to determine how safe it is where you spend your time. If you spend your time in dangerous places, you'll be less happy. And that depends on the person. Some people are not uncomfortable like that. I was not unhappy growing up in a dangerous neighborhood because of the dangers. I wasn't afraid of them. They were normal to me. I haven't been less happy when I've worked in really high crime areas as a cop, as I have been when I was pastoring here at the PUC church, and that was my whole routine, was to go the 3/4 of a mile from my house to my office here, where I don't even know if there's ever been a crime. I wasn't any happier here in general with my life. Now, it's generally possible within some limits, I suppose, for most people to make some adjustment to the threshold of how much is needed, and doing so falls into the area of spirituality. There are people who are blissfully happy, who have taken a poverty vow. They don't have any income. They do have, in some cases, secure plan, like they joined a monastery or a convent or something. Or they're living off the land and they're very happy. Or they're begging and they're very happy. If you think it is impossible to go find a street person who's blissfully happy, that's just not accurate, because you can. You can find people who are on a fixed income and who have a reasonable income, who want to be homeless. I don't know if you consider that mental illness, but they exist. I've met them. They can go and some of them are letting checks pile up because they don't want them. I mean, maybe they're ill. I don't know. There's also an enormous factor that has to be adjusted for, and this data does adjust for it. How happy we are is determined more by one factor than any other factor. And adjustments in that, like for other factors, have limits. And that is the surprising factor in the happiness equation that's larger than any others. Ready for this? It's just your genetics. It's just how you're born. You have choices you can make that'll botch it up. You know, real easy. You can go commit a felony so that you end up in prison. You're probably going to be a lot happier outside than inside. You could make wise choices and learn to be affirming of other people and have satisfying relationships, and learn to be content with what you have. Like Paul says, I've learned to be content with, in all circumstances. And that would make you happier. But is happiness at all really connected with what it is that spirituality is for? What spirituality deals with? Is spirituality at all involved how we feel, with how well things go for us. Is that a part of it? Is it relevant or is that irrelevant?
I feel like sometimes it can be relevant in some cases, especially like things like death. I know that sometimes spirituality, our emotions will take over sometimes over our spirituality.
Yes, like when we lose somebody
Yeah.
or we find out we're dying.
Yeah. I know that's like a main thing that
Yeah.
I personally experienced, so.
It seems like it's challenging spiritually. Maybe I'm wrong about this, and it's just a gut reaction. I don't know if there's any research that I've seen. Spirituality can be enhanced by finding out that I'm going to die, but it can be challenged when I lose people important to me. I don't know. It doesn't go that way for everyone, but it feels like I've seen that a lot.
I feel like because spirituality isn't a physical thing or really something that we can reason out, the only way we can like make sure that it's there is how we feel.
Okay, so what else do we have as a gauge on our dashboard of our consciousness for how the spirituality is going? If you go to a retreat to enhance spirituality and you come away from there feeling horrible, just devastated, or you go away from there feeling exactly the same as you got there. Now, what about though if you don't feel particularly different, but you say, sort of cognitively, objectively, that was valuable. And I think I'm probably equipped to be kinder now. I don't feel any happier or sadder or
And then I
warmer.
related response. A delayed response.
Then maybe the emotions would follow.
Yeah.
If a person was lobotomized, could they have a spiritual life after that, or would it be over? If a person had flat emotions, because people's emotional amplitudes vary from person to person, down to very flat emotion and people that are, some people on the autism spectrum don't really experience what we think of as many of the same feelings. It's missing, but still have preferences and make choices. But they don't have, it's not comparable. Can they have a spiritual life? Can a STEM student have a spiritual life just as much as a humanities student? If you're a mathematics person that's not also a music person, you're just all numbers, like Paul at Airbush, who's just numbers, and they take him to a symphony that's beautiful, and they take away his notebook and say, "You are going to sit here and listen to this music, Paul." And he takes the program and starts doing math on the program with a pencil he'd hidden in his pocket, a little nib of a pencil. And that was all he had for happiness was math. Other stuff didn't make him happy. Could, as the math community referred to him and the physics community, could Uncle Paul have a spiritual life? And could it improve? Let's look at a few passages. How do we navigate this money thing? People want our money. They're telling us we should earn it or we're going to be starving. And no one's going to want a relationship with us that is very intimate if we don't have any money.
Does it come down to like what spirituality is that individual? Because, for example, someone has money or no money, or someone that's just all about math, like Uncle Paul, or not. But it could, depending on what they've gone through in their life, or like what awakens them and brings them to that spiritual community, things like that.
Yes. Yes.
So, like, for example, like, you could be a billionaire, and have been raised, like you said, raised correctly, and taught great law and stuff, and give a lot of them away.
Right. If Jesus said it's harder for the rich man to enter the kingdom than it is for a camel to go through the eye of the needle. And if a person was just born to parents who were incredibly wealthy, can they have do they have a different set point on here, first of all? And can they simply live what feels normal to them and then explore the whole range of spirituality? And I argue that you can. There's an interesting movie. Some of you might have seen it. I've shown it in a couple of classes that I've taught. I've never shown it in this class because it's not entirely relevant to Christian spirituality. But it's called Monk with a Camera. It's about a very wealthy American socialite. His dad was the ambassador to France, and his grandmother was the editor of Vogue magazine or something like that. And he grew up having, and he got disillusioned with it in his 20s, with materialism and the sort of society and classism and everything, and he started studying different forms of spirituality and ultimately became a Tibetan Buddhist monk, and a real close friend of the Dalai Lama. And he describes at length how much it expanded his life, and it turned out that his family, still very wealthy, his brother and his parents, ended up perhaps admiring him more than anyone else in the family. Fascinating story, but could he have explored all of his spirituality and not have taken a poverty vow and said, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the long haul, I'm going to use this money to help other people. And I mean, if a poor person wants to help somebody with their funds, it might mean a lot. Let's look at a time when it does. In Luke 21, that's on page 65 of the New Testament in your Econo Bible here. Luke 21, the first 4 verses. He looked up and saw rich people putting their gifts into the treasury. He also saw a poor widow put in 2 small copper coins. He said, truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all of them. For all of them have contributed out of their abundance, but she out of her poverty has put in all she had to live on. She took what she had to live on and put that in the offering. Not only that, that offering where she was paying it wasn't even really a quality charity. Like if you go online and look at the ratings of charities and who's a ripoff and who's got 99.9% administrative overhead, which means a CEO that makes $1.3 million and they're telling you they're giving to orphans in Somalia or something, and they are, $1.50. They're giving almost nothing. Or recently, the Santa Claus bell ringers out in front of the store are taking a beating because people have come to terms with the fact that the Salvation Army is homophobic. Actively, politically active in trying to hold back the civil rights and the like of people with different gender expressions and sexual preferences and the like. And so recently I've been hearing people saying, don't put money in the little red bucket. That's nonsense. You're supporting this hate agenda. And so my wife has been giving stuff to one of these institutions. Tony Campolo came here and spoke at Vespers a couple of years back and talked about a charity where they give to poor kids in different countries. And so my wife said, oh, I'll sponsor some of those kids. So we've been given to that, and then she just got a letter and a phone call from this outfit saying that right now the local church that is responsible for running the educational and nutritional program for the children in that region, one of which is sponsored by our contributions. They found out that people have been mismanaging that and helping themselves more than is reasonable length at all. And so, hold on, we're holding that in escrow until we straighten it out. And so we're going, yeah, if they're contacting us telling us that, I'll bet you the reason is they're doing that before we find out in the press that they're getting downgraded as a charity because they got caught doing something. Now, well, the widow here that gave her offering is putting it into a relatively regularly corrupt religious entity that used the money to make it so that religious officials had a better life than many of the people contributing. So, and they were, they use that money to abuse people, and they were like religious bigots and the whole 9 yards. And she was putting it all in there. Jesus commended her because he said that she gave what she would have needed to have her expenses met for whatever period of time. She gave that sacrificially. Whereas a lot of the people were putting money into the offering box that was surplus. It was just okay, and I want to give a little of this, and but I still have a palace to live in. And recall what Jesus said in Mark 10 to the very rich guy. He said, you want to go all the way and take it to the next level, like you raised it. Jesus didn't raise the issue. Jesus wasn't after him saying, would you like to go all the way and start doing magic, and I'll give you a Harry Potter wand and all that. It wasn't like that. It was, the guy came to Jesus and said, what do I have to do so I can amp it up a notch? And Jesus said, you could give away everything you have to the poor. Now that would have been equivalent for a rich dude to what this woman did in the church. Is there anywhere here, though, that Jesus is, and I know we've said this before, but I want to say it a different way. I don't want any misconceptions here. What we're talking about when we talk about that rich guy taking it to another level, or that woman who was willing to take, when she had dirt nothing, and give it all, for 2 little cents, give it all. What we're talking about here is not all the other folk in town are on the road to hell. It's not it. We are not saved by giving away our stuff. We're not saved by figuring out how to stop sinning. We're not going to get there. You think that if I stand right here and stop sinning, I'm going to float up and go to heaven? Is that it? If I take whatever little bit I have in this life, turn it all into cash, and just donate it to whatever worthy student fund or something, then stand here, am I just going to levitate and go to where, or change dimensions? Is that going to happen? Is that how it happens? No, when we're talking about people being saved or being lost, it's a different discussion. It's not even necessarily a spirituality discussion. It's a salvation discussion. That's a different matter. We're not here talking about how you can get saved. All right? At least that's not all we're talking about. There's so much more than fire insurance in this life. If I sit in my house right now and I know that if the house burns and I make it out, whatever I have in the house, my piano and my furniture and my books and clothes and stuff, they're going to give me a check for that so I can go buy something to replace it. So that's it. That's all there is to living in a house. That's all the fun we can have there. This is all the fulfillment I get. Well, at least it's not going to. I'm not out if it burns. That's not all there is to following Jesus either. Just fire insurance. Is everybody clear on that? I don't want anyone to go away from here and say, wow, I looked at the Bible and the instructor was showing us that, gosh, I'm so discouraged. I have to live as a homeless beggar, give it all away, or I can't go to heaven. Not true. Okay? In James, James 5, come now, you rich people, weep and wail for the miseries that are coming to you. Your riches have rotted, your clothes are moth-eaten, your gold and silver have rusted, and the rust will be evidence against you, and it will eat your flesh like fire. Didn't Jesus talk about not storing up treasures here, because these are the kinds of things that will happen? So here it's like, all right, it happened. Now what? You have laid up treasure for the last days. You know, we want to make sure we've got enough for just in case. We want to make sure that we got our goal just in case our money, the bottom drops out of the economy or something. We've got to make sure, we've always got a plan. When I want to stop working, I want to make sure I got a big old nest egg. You've laid up treasure for the last days. Listen, the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you kept back by fraud, cry out. And the cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts. You have lived on the earth in luxury and in pleasure. You have fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered the righteous ones. Who does not resist you? Man, there's another place in James, earlier in the first chapter, it talks about how we act when a wealthy person comes where we are. You know, if Ted Turner came to campus, Ted Turner is the single largest. He owns the single largest individual personally held amount of real estate of any individual in the United States. He's the person who made his fortune from CNN. And he owns a lot of Montana. And he owns like almost a fourth of all of the American buffalo alive today. He owns them on his land. He's not a cattleman, he's a buffalo man. It's ridiculous how wealthy he is. He's got almost 50 miles of border of his ranches that border the national parks and forests. Can you imagine having your property line just on one axis, just bordering one neighbor, be almost 50 miles long? So if he came here, and he was coming here, and different campus officials know he's coming here, would there be any behavior toward Ted Turner that would vary from some half-crazy, pot-smoking, homeless person who tries to stay in the bushes? Would we treat him? Would anybody here on campus treat that man, Ted Turner, differently than their second man? So, if that's true, it's evil. It's wrong. It's wrong to do. And it's against the teachings of Christ. Do I have to be poor? Do I have to intentionally choose some sort of career that pays me poorly in order to make progress spiritually, though? I don't. Do you? Do you? Or is it a matter of how you deal with whatever resources you have? What would it look like would it look like to be wealthy by whatever standard you want to imagine that, whatever that means to you? That's debatable anyway, what it means to be wealthy instead of just rich, or rich instead of middle class, or middle class instead of impoverished. What would it mean? How would you do if you were wealthy and you were following Jesus with all of your resources? What would it be? That you'd be following the rules while you accumulated? Would it be okay to try to have twice as much, within 5 years or 10 years? Would that be incompatible, or would it be compatible? What do you think? Yes, sir.
I would say it kind of depends on like the mindset for why you're trying to like grow your wealth.
Okay.
Because if you're doing it out of like compassion and generosity, then it's probably a good thing. Because I mean, yeah, I feel like the wealthier you are in today's society, the more you're like able to help people, even though it might not be as meaningful as a poor person.
If you systematically hurt people in order to become wealthy so that someday you could help people, do you think that is legitimate?
No,
No?
I don't think you have to be.
Are there some strategies? Without harming others and without depriving them to accumulate wealth today? So you're not hurting people, you're enriching other people. Are there some strategies?
I mean, the idea of business ownership is that you're employing people, which is paying their salary so that they can live a comfortable life. I mean, in a way,
I'm
that's
not sure that's an accurate description of the idea of business ownership. I
Well,
think the idea is usually to see how little you can pay them so you can maximize profits, and you get them to do things, and if you could get a machine to do it instead,
yeah.
you would.
But I
Usually.
mean, theoretically, like, the invisible hand is supposed to, push everyone up.
I know,
Like, it
but
doesn't always work that way due to, like, corruption and greed.
It doesn't ever work that way.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work. It's dogma that, number one, is unprovable, and number two, if you looked at the big picture, given enough time, it's never shown that it.
I mean, like,
works that way.
society today is quite a bit better off than it once was.
Yes, it is.
And I think part of that is industrialization. I mean,
It probably is, because there's a certain amount of synergy and cooperation that occurs by being in community.
yeah. But I mean,
Definitely.
yeah. Like, if we didn't
I
have.
think it's true that if you take what we consider poor today, as a result of the kind of society we have, we take what today would consider poor. I mean, somebody who lives in project housing,
Yeah.
government-assisted housing, and they don't have a bank account. And they get some food stamps, or they're just, can't quite qualify for it, or whatever. I think that some of what they have would be something that kings centuries ago
Yeah, century, yeah.
would have killed for.
Yeah,
There's
and I mean-
there's people living like that who barely have a job at Walmart, but they're wearing $150 shoes with LEDs in them and have an iPhone. I've seen them. There's other things though, but those other things might not have existed hundreds of years ago, like medical care. I mean, people can have access today to the kind of medical care they had, 500 years ago without paying for it. Because anyone who's just been to high school knows to tell you to do more than physicians knew 500 years ago. You just ask your neighbor, who's just not stupid, right?
Yeah.
And they'll help you without any supplies. You still have better medical care just by not having the medical care that they had back then. So some things are better. People can make a phone call anywhere in the world for almost nothing. For a very minimal amount. And they can get on a city bus or a subway and go further than many, in just a few minutes than a lot of people travel from the time they were born until their funeral. Yes. So in some respects, yes. Imagine a business, imagine an income. What if I write a book? And the book is something that gives people a lot of relief just to have the information. It's very valuable to them. It gives them hope and lifts their spirits and helps them to stop battling with their children and their spouse and their neighbors and everything. And it really, they read it and they're really changed by it, you know, more than money could ever. And then a book costs, you know, less than $30. Something that's going to take, it's a big fat sucker that takes, you know, 3 months of nightstanding it before it, you know, you really get through it. And say it's $23.95, and Amazon sometimes, you know, will sell it for $22.95 or something. And let's say millions of people buy it. If millions, say 50 million people bought my book, have I screwed anybody to get that money? I haven't, have I? Am I being selfish? Am I hurting society or individuals in any way? No. Am I then wealthy, though? And I wrote the book to help people, right? I think there's trillions of other descriptions we could give of how you could earn.
I mean, but then,
Well,
then you can make the argument that, like, why weren't you just giving a book away for free?
because people throw it away like it's junk.
Yeah.
People don't value it if they don't pay for it. I mean, and that's a fair thing. I mean, all I'm doing is just giving one example,
Yeah.
but I believe that there are a trillion examples for each person here of how you could truly be enhancing everybody, not selfish at all, and even be wealthy without compromising your spirituality one bit. Does that sound like I'm crazy, or is it possible? But it might require that you require it. You don't just take a path that someone else tries to put you on that's inherently selfish, greedy, and competitive. Whatever that means for you. You don't accept it no matter how much pressure there is. I don't believe there's anybody here that couldn't find a way to do really well, to be far past this, and be able to pursue your spirituality 100%. The man wasn't asked to give everything away to the poor because he had stuff. It's not the having it that was a problem. It's what it represented to him, how he was getting it, and what it meant in life to him. He needed to let go of it because he was holding on to it. You could have all of that without even grasping for it. It could just find you. And it might. God bless you. We'll see you on Friday.